Okay, welcome to the Gender Smart Entrepreneurship Education and Training Virtual Roundtable. Just a little bit of housekeeping at the beginning. We ask that you keep yourself muted throughout the course of the roundtable until the very end, where there will be a discussion portion and a Q&A portion. And to note, this meeting is being recorded. We will share a video recording at the end, but if you have any concern about being recorded and your participation being recorded, please email mhandler@gbsn.org. We can put that in the chat as well. We also encourage you to participate during the course of the discussions through the chat. Share your questions, share your comments throughout the course of the roundtable. And like I said, at the end, that's when we'll do the interactive portion. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dan LeClaire, who is the CEO of the Global Business School Network.
Thanks so much, Nicole. And I want to, first of all, add my welcome to everyone that's joining us this morning, this afternoon, this evening. We are happy you are here. I'm Dan LeClaire. I'm the head of the Global Business School Network, which is a network of about 120 schools in a little more than 50 countries. So we are leading business schools working with NGOs, business, governments around the world to improve leadership, management, entrepreneurship in and for the developing world. And we're pleased to not only host this event along with the International Development Research Center, Women's Economic Imperative, and Telfair School of Management, but we're also pleased to be supportive of this initiative. And some people have asked why, and if it's not obvious, it's because we at GBSN are in the business of improving leadership, management, entrepreneurship education, not just making it more accessible, but we think it's important to get better at it. And getting better at it means making it more effective, not for just one group, but for all groups. And for us, this is especially important as we move forward to make sure that we're doing right by women, as well as men, as well as any other group moving forward. So this is about doing our job better. I'm going to turn it over very soon to Dr. Thomas, who will moderate our program today. But just let me give you a quick overview. We'll start with some introductory remarks, not only by Dr. Thomas, but by others. We'll then turn it over to a panel discussion. And then in the middle of that, have a brief introduction to GEET Plus. You'll learn more about that, of course, as we go, but it's an important part, if not the central part of what we're talking about today. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Thomas.
Thank you very much, Dan, for the warm introduction and a warm welcome to everyone who's joining us for the call today, for the round table today. As Dan mentioned, my name is Margot Thomas. I am the president and CEO of Women's Economic Imperative. This is a nonprofit organization that was actually established in response to the UN High-Level Panel on Women's Economic Empowerment's call to action in 2017. I had the privilege of leading the secretariat that supported that panel and working very closely with the co-chairs and the members of the panel. And so this work that we're engaged in Women's Economic Imperative is in many respects a direct offshoot. WAIS committed to catalyzing and advancing women's economic empowerment through entrepreneurship and advocacy. And we focused on entrepreneurship because it is indeed a driver for empowering women, growing economies, and empowering underrepresented groups and their contribution to economic development for the benefit of all. I like to say this is not a woman's issue, this is everybody's issue, because if everybody is better off, we're all better off. And it comes, this commitment to entrepreneurship comes from that understanding. I spent much of my career in the World Bank advising on inclusive economic growth, and therefore I see the need, especially in view of the devastating impact of the pandemic globally, in the North and in the South. This focus on inclusive entrepreneurship, education, and training, for which Way is very grateful that our board member, Professor Orser, has developed this work. And we're very pleased to not just support it, but to take a very active role in adapting the methodology that she has developed along with her co-authors, and trying to figure out how it can be adapted and applied, particularly in the developing South. And today we're going to spend some time engaging in that. Finally, I would again like to echo our thanks to IDRC for supporting this work, the collaboration and the support that the Global Business Schools Network has provided to us, and their enthusiastic support and hosting today's roundtable. And last but not least, of course, Telfer School of Management. So without further ado, I would now like to introduce Erin Tansey, the Director for Sustainable and Inclusive Economies at IDRC, to share with us her opening remarks.
Thank you so much, and welcome, I guess, to everyone as well. Welcome, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. I am in sunny Ottawa. So yes, my name is Erin Tansey. I am the new Director for the Sustainable Inclusive Economies Division at the International Development Research Centre here in Ottawa. I've just recently moved from South Africa, where I was living for 18 years. So I'm slowly adjusting and acclimatizing to the Ottawa life in COVID times. It's quite interesting. Anyway, it's lovely to be with you. I'm sure you probably know, IDRC is part of Canada's foreign affairs and development efforts. So we fund and support high quality research in developing countries. We share knowledge with researchers and policymakers to inform local and global action and mobilize alliances to drive global positive change. So at IDRC, in our Sustainable and Inclusive Economies program, we are building the evidence base to support sustainable development, reduces greenhouse gas emissions. Our program enhances climate resiliency, fosters shared prosperity, and expands economic opportunities for women and youth in developing countries. Within our team, we support research that addresses the many systemic barriers that prevent marginalized women and girls in developing countries from advancing economically. Many of you might be familiar with our GROW work that continues on women's economic empowerment, and I encourage you to take a look at our website and get more information of that ongoing program. So the gender gap in entrepreneurship is pervasive and has been exacerbated by the pandemic. The challenges for women entrepreneurship are many, ranging from lack of access to capital and business support to sociocultural contexts that reinforce ingrained gender norms and roles and limit women's potential. So entrepreneurial education and training and other forms of entrepreneurial support, such as accelerators, play a crucial role in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. Yet the gender gap on entrepreneurial education, training, and support is pervasive. For example, only 13% of applicants to accelerators are women-led teams, compared to 52% male-led and 35% mixed teams. And that's according to the Global Accelerator Learning Initiative, which is also supported by IDRC. This means that women entrepreneurs are less likely than their male counterparts to access the benefits from the business, network, and investment support that accelerators provide. The Gender Smart Entrepreneurship Education and Training, the GEET Plus framework, which you'll hear more about today, is a key tool to building entrepreneurial ecosystems to support women entrepreneurs. Researchers at Telfer Business School, the University of Ottawa, have developed this innovative framework which can be used by instructors and trainers to assess the status quo of equality, diversity, and inclusion in entrepreneurship courses and programs to develop gender smart curricula. So we're very proud to partner with and support WAY and Telfer and work in collaboration with local researchers and key stakeholders to adapt, test, and implement the GEET Plus framework in Peru, in Mexico, in Kenya, and Nigeria, so as to strengthen the design and the delivery of entrepreneurship courses and programs and reduce gender, racial, and occupational stereotypes and unconscious biases associated with entrepreneurship education and training. The COVID-19 pandemic has amplified the cost and impact of social and economic inequalities, as you all know, especially on women and girls, increasing the urgency and relevance of this work in the context of the response and the recovery from the pandemic. So we think that inclusive entrepreneurial education is an important step to build entrepreneurial ecosystems that are drivers of sustainable and inclusive growth and economic empowerment of women and girls. So with that, I will leave you and wish you a very fruitful discussion today, and looking forward to hearing the outcomes of today's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erin. Very appreciative of your comments and your support. And now I would like to introduce Dr. Stefan Brutus, who is currently the Dean of Telfer School of Management at the University of Ottawa. He has kindly shared his pre-recorded remarks with us.
Congratulations to Women's Economic Imperative on the launch of the Gender Smart Entrepreneurship Education and Training Plus Action Strategy. Thank you to International Development Research Center for funding this initiative, and to the Global Business School Network for all of your contributions, such as hosting today's roundtable. My name is Stefan Brutus. I'm the Dean of the Telfer School of Management at the University of Ottawa, the largest bilingual university, French and English, in the world. I wish I was with you today, but since I couldn't, I thought it'd be nice to just record a little welcome video to welcome you all virtually to Telfer. The GEET Plus Action Strategy and the work of Telfer faculty, Dr. Barbara Orser and Dr. Catherine Elliott, is a perfect illustration of how Telfer teams are deploying evidence-based insight to create a greener, happier, healthier, and wealthier environment for all. For us, strengthening entrepreneurial ecosystem is a real focus of our research and our outreach. Our researchers are specializing specifically on diverse entrepreneurs, such as family business owners, immigrants, and newcomer entrepreneurs. We also strive to have policy impact, being in Ottawa, such as the studies on women enterprises policy in collaboration with Global Women Enterprise Policy Group and the OECD. Telfer's mission is simple and complex. It's business for better Canada. And a better Canada is one in which everyone has an opportunity to prosper and make a contribution. We recently hosted our 6th annual Diversity and Inclusion MBA case competition, where we hosted 10 teams of MBA students who addressed the challenges of corporate Canada in addressing systematic anti-Black racism. Today, we are with you, and I'm very happy to be with you as part of the Gender Smart Entrepreneurship Education and Training Plus. We are therefore delighted to participate in today's roundtable and learn from project partners such as the Women's Economic Imperative, International Development Research Center, Tecnológico de Monterrey, Strathmore University Business School, Kenya, and audience participants. I wish you great success as you develop and strengthen the pathways to build strong, healthy women-owned enterprises. And I also invite you to visit the Telfer website to learn more about our many great researchers who strive to make a greener, happier, healthier, and wealthier world, and the Women Entrepreneurship Research Exchange that hosts a series of related Telfer reports. So again, thank you, welcome to Telfer, and have a great session.
Brutus. Thank you very much, Dean Brutus. And we certainly appreciate your continued support for this important issue, particularly in the current state of affairs, given the pandemic and the impacts on women and disadvantaged groups. I'd now like to very quickly introduce our panel. And I will start with Professor Helen Nyolo Otieno, who's the Associate Dean at Strathmore Business School in Kenya. Geraldina Silveira Leon, who is the Academic Director of the Instituto de Emprendimiento y Junio Garza Laguera in Mexico. And Carolina Rubino, who's the Senior Program Specialist, Employment and Growth at the International Development Research Center. You will hear more from each of the panel members as they speak. Last but not least, I would like to introduce Professor Barbara Orser, Deloitte Professor in the Management of Growth Enterprises at the Telfer School of Management, University of Ottawa. And as you've heard so far, the underpinning for our discussion in this roundtable today that's linked to the launch of this GEET Plus project is the work that Professor Orser has led. And so I will now turn to her so that she can explain to you what exactly is the GEET Plus and what is it intended to do in order to help us to frame this discussion. Please, Barbara, over to you. I will message.
Okay, I think we're there.
There you
go. Is that okay? Great.
Yes.
All right. Well, bonjour à tous. And as well, I'd like to share my thanks to the Global Business School Network, our sponsors, IDRC, and of course, all the panelists who are contributing to this initiative. And Nicole, if you can just flag, this is a large team of leading scholars in the area of gender and entrepreneurship. I'd also like to acknowledge my co-author on the Gender Smart Entrepreneurship Education and Training Plus technical report, Dr. Catherine Elliott, and Catherine's on the line today with a number of my Telfer colleagues. So welcome, Catherine, I know you're with us. And we're collectively working to ensure that entrepreneurship education and training does not amplify gender inequality. And in setting my opening comments, I thought I would frame, the context further from what we've heard up to this point. In 2019-2020, Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, a flagship report at Babson College, reported on the conditions to support entrepreneurship in situ countries. They talked to 54 economies, assessing the entrepreneurial environment with 12 underlying conditions, such as ease of market entry, access to capital, etc. Entrepreneurship education was universally ranked the weakest condition. There is much to do to improve the quality of entrepreneurship education across the world. And from a global lens, we know that researchers have reviewed syllabi, textbooks, and learning processes among university students. To the best of our knowledge, the WAY-led GEET Plus initiative or action strategy is the first international collaboration to employ a gender lens to inform entrepreneurship education and training. And the timing is really important. As we've transitioned to distance classrooms, as we see the emergence of virtual accelerators and incubators, as governments are transitioning budgets to healthcare from education, and as educators seek digital content, there's certainly the threat of amplifying well-established occupational stereotypes and gendered content across universities. And what's the amplitude of that? Well, we know in 2017, there were about 7,000 physical accelerators and incubators in the world. Medical, kitchen, public, private, small business and innovation support organizations. We know about 14% of the total number of national startups are by student entrepreneurs. supported by 25,000 universities globally. In North America, that includes about 5,300 universities and colleges in the US, over 1,200 in Mexico, and over 250 in Canada. So like the University of Ottawa, Arts, Engineering, Health Sciences, and Telfer School of Management, we offer undergraduate and graduate credit courses, extracurricular activities to support nascent entrepreneurs. And we're working with our community, Invest Ottawa, Canada North in Ottawa, to link students with industry. So the opportunities are great, but we know the relationships are also gendered. Evidence demonstrates that when you look at the profile of participants in accelerators and incubators, women are far less likely to be engaged. And we see that in evidence from the World Bank, the OECD, the International Finance Corporation, as well as Onde and Emory University. For example, a 2016 study of 51 high-tech accelerators and incubators across the United States found women and racialized or minority entrepreneurs were significantly less likely to participate at the same rates as white males. Unintentional barriers included limited client recruitment, bias selection processes, and program design. And that's really where we're beginning to focus our work, to improve outreach, to improve content, and improve curricular design. And with that, I'll turn it back to Margot.
Thank you very much, Barbara. And so I would now like to turn to our panel members, our esteemed panel members who are actively involved in this project in one way or another, to share with us their views. And I'd like to start with Professor Helen Niolo Otieno to ask Helen, from her perspective, why is entrepreneurship education and training important in the context of sub-Saharan Africa, and specifically in the case of Kenya, which is one of the larger economies on the continent?
Thank you, Margot, for your kind introduction. Let me just share my experience, and first of all, just to put in perspective from the speakers who have already come on board, all those statistics, when you look at the sub-Saharan Africa, the situation is even worse, because when you look at the current statistics of Africa, it shows that women are more than 50% of the total population, and a significant number of these women are actually engaged in entrepreneurial activities. But when you look at the kind of activities that women are mostly engaged in, they are activities that are actually low value adding. So when you look at even like the study that we are doing, where we are looking at high-end, low end, it is actually reinforcing the stereotype that you will find a woman is more likely to venture into those kind of activities or those sectors which are not value adding. And also the socio-cultural context of the woman, which is one of those key issues that actually is creating conflict, because even when you look at when a woman is empowered, in fact, yesterday when we were having a conversation with the IDRC team, they asked a question, are we looking at how do you define the women entrepreneurs? Are you talking about woman-led or woman-owned business? And it made me thinking. And I went back to a study that we were doing in 2014, where you were looking at even when the woman is actually in the forefront, because like now the affirmative action where we have the access to public procurement opportunities, the ACPO program, they require that women must always be given 30%. And what that meant was that immediately even businesses which were men-owned transformed, and now the woman was put in the forefront. And so the woman is being used here to be made in the forefront, but the decision-making still is being done by the man. The other issue here is about sustainability, because when you look at sustainability of women-owned enterprises or women-led enterprises, if the business is successful, the success of the business means that, and we came across a scenario where a woman entrepreneur will tell you, when I started this business, my husband was very, very cross with me because that was demeaning from his point of view, yeah, from the male world. But when the business became successful, all of a sudden one day he saw the man on the counter, the one who is now receiving money, and he was at a she was at a crossroad. What do I do? Do I let my family to collapse, or do I let the business to collapse? Of course, she went at the back seat. So it's a case where you might find that even how we measure success of the women-owned enterprises need to be different. And that is why inclusive entrepreneurial education then becomes very key, because when the woman is empowered, they can make those decisions, they can stand for their right, they can make right choices. The other thing again is looking at, yes?
Can I let us come back to the secondary part of the argument at this stage? Because
Yes.
I think you've made a very, very strong case for why at this particular point in time, the focus on entrepreneurial education is so important if we're going to nurture and to develop an ecosystem that supports women entrepreneurs engaged in high value productive activity. And of course,
Yeah.
the education is an important part of that. So thank you very much. And we'll come back to go deeper
Okay.
in the second round. In order to keep it moving, I'd now like to turn to Professor Geraldina Silveira Leon. Geraldina, could you kindly, you're based in Mexico, you're working on entrepreneurship ecosystems in Mexico and in Central America, I imagine. Can you describe for us how your work informs inclusive entrepreneurial competencies?
Yes, Margot, thank you very much for having me. First, I would like to, and following on what Professor Helen was mentioning a few moments ago, entrepreneurship education is regardless if we're focusing on actually encouraging students to open their business, or even if what we're trying to do is increase their competencies, no? So we focus on the development of competencies, no? So that these competencies, research has shown that it leads to an increase in their entrepreneurial self-efficacy, but it can also increase their self-efficacy generally speaking. So that is something that is very important in education. So a research that we have been doing is how can we develop certain competencies in short periods of time according to our academic periods as such, no? And during those during the time that we have these students in the classroom with us, how can we develop these competencies becomes important, and it is an important aspect that the GEET Plus considers or takes into account. No, and most studies focus on measuring the result of the courses, sometimes measured by the increase in the students' competencies and also an increase in their entrepreneurial intentions. However, there is little research focusing on the content itself, and the content we have seen, no, that the studies somehow say that men show traditionally a higher entrepreneurial intention, and sometimes this is due because women, they need to they need external support, or the way that their entrepreneurial intentions are shaped is different from men. No, it does not mean that they are less capable or less interested, no, in entrepreneurship. So we have to go back and also, according to what Professor Helen said, we have to go back and say how are we, and question how are we designing our courses, what are the pedagogies we're using that has these impacts, no, in both men and women students. So it is important to take this into consideration when designing courses and training in order to achieve an increase in women's self-efficacy and encourage them to become entrepreneurs, or as Helen said, encourage them to have this security in their own capabilities.
Thank you very much, Geraldina. And of course, we're looking at just one aspect here and looking at the education. We know that there's a broader ecosystem and there needs to be work across the spectrum of activities. But the whole thrust here is that this aspect is often overlooked. And
Exactly.
it, in fact, helps to deepen the existing biases. And so this tool, the GEET Plus, is designed to help us think about that and take action accordingly. I'd now like to turn my attention to Carolina Robino of the IDRC with a question for you, Carolina. How might IDRC's Grow and Economic and Opportunities for Women program, the GROW program that your director referred to earlier, and any other work programs with which IDRC is engaged, contribute or provide insights and support for the larger goal of women's economic empowerment? And what would it mean for entrepreneurial education and training specifically?
Sure. First of all, thank you for the invitation to be part of this important and timely panel. I'm very happy to join this event and represent IDRC together with our director, Erin Tansin, who spoke earlier. So as you noted and Erin mentioned, IDRC has supported important work on women economic empowerment, including through the multi-funder Grow and Economic Opportunities for Women program. And as Erin, Helen, Barb, and Geraldina too mentioned, research constantly shows that women entrepreneurs lack access to the resources needed to reach their economic potential in any dimension that you consider. So a couple of years ago, we supported the United Nations high-level panel on women economic empowerment, which you, Margot, led, to take stock of what we know about women entrepreneurs, the barriers that they face, the role of economic and social cultural factors, what works in supporting women-owned businesses, and where the knowledge gaps are. And I think there is now growing evidence on the challenges, but fortunately, there is also growing evidence on the solutions, on what works in supporting women-owned businesses. Very important to this discussion today is, I think, the evidence also shows that women benefit less from entrepreneurial education and training, and women are underrepresented within entrepreneurship courses. As Barb alluded to, different statistics and studies really pointed to that. And building on the Global Acceleration Learning Initiative data, the research we support shows that what we call gender-blind accelerators can actually amplify gender gaps. And we are really supporting research on the effects of acceleration on women entrepreneurs and how to address these. And I might be able perhaps to speak a little bit more about this later. So our research shows that the importance of bundled constraints for women, and this is a point I want to highlight. Women not only face lack of access to capital, but they face lack of access to capital and many other constraints that overlap and happen at the very same time. So these intersecting dimensions amplify the challenge. And this means that the expansion of entrepreneurial activity for women and the potential for success of support programs such as Entrepreneurial entrepreneurial education and training cannot be seen in isolation of the broader gender inequalities, including the responsibilities women have in the care economy. And this is critical when we look at the entrepreneurial education and training. We really need to understand and act upon structural impediments and biases, be it economic, legal, social, cultural, including within entrepreneurial ecosystems. So how can we eliminate these biases in the recruitment, in the selection, in the content of entrepreneurship programs and support services, but also we need to take into account impediments and biases that originate outside entrepreneurial ecosystems, including gender norms that explain the overburden of care tasks on women. And this is not only critical, but timely, as I said at the beginning, because the COVID pandemic has both deepened and exacerbated gender inequality. Many talks about a she-cession. Women-owned businesses have been significantly affected. And entrepreneurship will likely be a key component of the economic recovery in a post-pandemic world. And we have an opportunity to build forward better towards a more inclusive economy. There is global acknowledgement that addressing inequalities and fostering women economic empowerment is not only the right thing to do, but it's good for economics. So if entrepreneurship will be an important tool for the recovery, inclusive entrepreneurship has a key role to play. And again, for this, we really need inclusive or gender smart entrepreneurial education and training. I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Carolina. I think you've helped us to pull together a number of the pieces. And I think what I've heard here in the argumentations just articulates so very clearly why WAY is committed to this work, because it's an area that's overlooked. And to your point, you know, in the recovery from the pandemic, the economic and the social costs and burdens that have increased as a result of the pandemic, we have to try to tackle some of these systemic issues. And it's easy to overlook education as part of that systemic panoply of barriers. So thank you very much. I'd now like to return to Helen, because as an educator with deep experience and an expansive set of research that you're doing, and you've already, I think, laid the foundation in your opening remarks, and speaking also of the personal experience of women entrepreneurs that you have observed in your work. What are your hypotheses around the engagement of women in early stage startups? What is it that we need to do differently? What is it that we need to do differently about how we provide training and instruction? And then how do we push for change in the broader ecosystem? If you had to prioritize two things that we need to do, what would those things be?
Thank you, Margot. I think from my experience, as I was just explaining, what I've seen is that there are very many hidden barriers that we may not be able to observe. Even as we do those researches, those barriers are always there, and they remain behind. And for me, what we came, and later on when we will be looking at one of the actions that, or the good practice, I was going to mention about the Women Enterprise Fund. And what that came to mind is that when we have these approaches that are actually fragmented, we are only telling part of the story. We need to have a multi-pronged approach that basically tackles all these barriers from every angle. And Carolina has alluded to that, because there are those dynamics around the social norms. How do we define, for example, in the social context, what does it mean to be a good wife or a good woman? If the business that is going to take you away from that and you are now successful, and the society is stereotyping you to mean that you have actually deserted married, or you are now irresponsible family or an irresponsible mother, you can already see that there is a psychological and stereotype barrier that will be there. Again, one of the questions as we were doing this research, the men were now asking, and this I'm talking from the Kenyan context, yes, the government has done well by creating the Women Enterprise Fund, but where is the Men Enterprise Fund? And we came across a scenario where the woman is given the fund, but the man will take it. So if we are just approaching this, to me, my hypothesis is that if we have to make strides, then we have to have multiplicity of these approaches so that we not just focusing on the woman at the background, but all those things which are in their ecosystem. Another case in point, when we have a mentoring sessions or program where we mentor entrepreneurs. I'm a coach. So as I'm being assigned a woman entrepreneur who is coming, she comes with a husband, and then all of a sudden the husband has taken over. So I'm at a loss now because the husband is the director of the company. He does not even have financial analytics or skills, but he's at the top by simply being the man. So all those are barriers that we need to think about at the institutional level, at the individual level, and also even at the organizational level. For me, that would be my hypothesis, that if we have to make strides, we have to tackle all of this at the same time. Mm-hmm. What I was trying to come up to think about, you see, the 3-cycle model for family businesses. Maybe it is time we also think about the 3-cycle model for inclusive entrepreneurial education, so that we tackle the organizational, the institutional, and also at the individual level. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Helen. This is so instructive. And you talk about the psychological and stereotypical barriers. I was smiling because, you know, this is not a phenomenon that's unique to the global South and to those cultural contexts, because we're seeing this in what we typically call the developed North as well. Mm-hmm. And the expectations of society in terms of a woman's role in the care economy, as Carolina correctly put it, we see women closing businesses, for example, in the United States, because they cannot balance work and family, particularly in the context of the impact of the pandemic, or exiting the labor force. In the US, I think in December, 148,000 women exited the labor force precisely for that reason. So this is the point here is that we have to take a broader view to address the systemic issues, recognizing that it has an impact on everybody, because everybody suffers insofar as we don't address these issues. Thank you very much. Geraldina, I'd like to come back to you if you don't mind. And you work in a multi-campus environment where access to programs and resources vary geographically, I guess. And can you tell us how that impacts the engagement of women students, female students, or women who are participating in these programs? Does that have an impact on their level of engagement? And what should we do, or how do we address some of the issues of the lower level of participation of women in accelerators and incubators?
Yes, Margot, we have we are a network of 30 campus throughout the country. So although before the pandemic, yes, we had a different portfolio, no, of the different programs that we held in each one of the campus. Now with the pandemic, we have actually been able to somehow attend entrepreneurs in a more similar way. However, we do see that there's as you mentioned, a lower engagement of women students in accelerators and incubators. And this is due to the fact that sometimes women find it difficult not to recognize themselves as entrepreneurs because they associate it with a male activity. And or incubators and accelerators, unfortunately, when holding more men students, of course, that yeah, it prevails, no, this perception that the women's students have. So one of the things that we have been doing is to have this gender lens, no, and be more aware of how can we, for example, join or add women mentors, no, for example, or how can we encourage women entrepreneurs, role models, so that they can, women students can have, yeah, can see them as role models and see that it is possible for them to actually become entrepreneurs. Also, we have seen that women start businesses out of necessity or because they find an opportunity, while men, they do it out of vocation. No, they see themselves as entrepreneurs as a result of defining that as a way of life, or as a professional path or a career. So that is also has important implications in how can we engage women in our accelerators and incubator programs. Also, and this was mentioned already, no, women not only face this association of entrepreneurship as a male activity in programs, but also when they are trying to attract investment, and the support system that they have, no? So in there, we also have a challenge. How do we attract not only women investors, but also how can we decrease the bias, no, that they have on business, on women entrepreneurs. And of course, we as a university entrepreneurial ecosystem, we need to include this gender perspective, not talking about specific actions that we have to take. And this is something that has been working, and in a few moments, I would like to share some specific best practices that have been giving important results in considering this perspective in our ecosystem. Something that we could also take advantage of is that there are studies that show that women entrepreneurs, they prefer to professionalize alongside other entrepreneurs. This is communities. No, if they are prone to join and build communities to develop themselves professionally and personally, then I think this could be a good starting point to consider including in our ecosystems. No, focus not in the actors or stakeholders of the ecosystem itself, but go back to the go into a more specific level, which could be communities. No, build communities of women founders, of women investors, of women student entrepreneurs, so that we can encourage and change this perspective of entrepreneurship being a male activity.
Thank you very much, Geraldina. I appreciate that, giving us that level of granularity and very specific set of comments there. I'd now like to turn to Carolina again, if you don't mind. And I know that, Carolina, you've been doing work on financial ecosystems. And can you tell us from that work that IDRC has sponsored, where is it that you see opportunities to avoid taking a gender blind approach in delivering entrepreneurship education and training in order to make it more impactful and supportive of women's entrepreneurship?
Thank you, Margot. At IDRC, we have been supporting action research on business models that generate solutions to development challenge and bring together profit and social and environmental returns, but also on the impact investing and finance mechanisms to support these entrepreneurs' growth. So our programming includes a focus on bringing a gender lens to purpose-driven business and impact investing. And while we see a positive trend and an upsurge of capital flowing into the space of gender lens investing, this is still a small fraction of the impact investing and industry. And most efforts still focus on unlocking gender smart capital. And while, of course, there are challenges associated with the flowing more capital to the impact investing space with a gender lens, there are also important challenges around building up investment pipelines. So how can we ease the friction between, if you want, the supply of gender lens investment capital and the demand for it? So here is where I think entrepreneurial education and training with a gender lens can play a role. So focusing on entrepreneurship, entrepreneurial education and training to support women-owned firms in the middle, I think can provide an important pathway for women to build and scale enterprises and grow bankable women-led SMEs to feed into investors' pipelines. So gender smart entrepreneurial education and training, I think, can be an important part of that journey to expand pipelines for investable companies that are led on or owned by women. But there is also a growing recognition that to grow the pipeline for genderless investing, there is a need to support small and medium enterprises that not necessarily are led or owned by women. I also think that these other SMEs can embed gender in their business model, regardless or the gender of their leadership. So really, this really goes beyond women-led or women-owned firms. So the point is, how can gender be integrated across the spectrum of any business operations? And I think there is an important role for business support services, technical assistance, acceleration, and entrepreneurial education and training.
Thank you.
So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Carolina, because, you know, way in itself, we are focusing on trying to deepen the quality of the pipelines of women-owned enterprises that can compete for investment and can compete for resources. And this is something I think that would help to open up the space if we could focus on the role that education and training plays, not just for women, but for all people who are engaged, because then it certainly helps to expand and to enrich, and everybody benefits. This is my mantra, you know. This is not a woman's issue at the end of the day. This is about each and every one of us. And if we can get our policymakers to understand that, then it means that they will include incentives and structures that can change that. And our cultural and social context, I think, would become more meaningful why we need these systemic and structural changes. It's a tough slog, but it's work that we've got to do, and it's work that I think we have the heart and the commitment to doing, as is evidenced by the discussion or just from this small segment here on the panel. I'd like to, at this stage, so thank you, Carolina. I would like at this stage to turn to my co-moderator, Dan. Because you've been listening to this discussion so far, you've also been multitasking. So you've been monitoring some of the comments from our audience and our participants. And I'd like to ask you, Dan, if you could share some of the insights, but also bringing to it the prism that your role in leading the Global Business School Network offers.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity, Margot. I appreciate it very much. And I'm going to say that from my perspective, first and foremost, what I've learned through this discussion is just how very complex these issues really are. When you begin to unpack all of the things that have been talked about thus far, it really does seem overwhelming, to be completely straightforward. And some of the discussions I've had with participants, both openly and in one-to-one messaging, this is really an important part. It's not just the recruitment part, as has been pointed to several times. And it's not only the way we select from the applicants, so it's that pipeline of applicants, but then how do we address that pipeline of applicants in a way that either is blind or is focused, depending on the particular program. But then as we start to talk about the curriculum, the program itself, and to be able to unpack this in a way that I think from the start, many of us begin to realize that we want to do good, not bad. So how do we unpack the curriculum and begin to understand what not to do as well as what to do in these programs? And then, as several panelists have mentioned, then you have the broader context, right? And, you know, it reminds me of some work I've done, for example, with ethics education, right? If you do the best you can in business schools, for example, to develop an ethical mindset amongst your graduates, if you're putting them out into companies where their cultures are not necessarily consistent, culture will always win in helping to shape the decisions that are actually made. So the first thing that I like to do is point out that, to me, you know, this is like an onion, in the sense of unpacking every layer begins to help me to understand how very complicated it is. As we move forward in this discussion, I'm very curious, with all of the comments in the chat. It seems like we have a lot of people online that are working on at least parts of the solution. And as we begin to piece these together and to understand it from a holistic point of view, I would love to hear more. So I'm going to pause now. I know that's in some sense a cop-out based on your question, you know, to begin to wrap our arms around this, but I'm going to go the opposite direction and talk about how very difficult that challenge is appearing to me in this discussion.
Yes. Thank you, Dan. I think you've certainly helped us to acknowledge. I think many of us around the table, so to speak, the virtual table, certainly appreciate that from our work, the complexities. And often the challenge is, where do you start? But in this broad spectrum of issues, where does entrepreneurship education itself fit? I have to say that was my initial reaction when Barbara explained to me the tool that the assessment that her work had produced. Because I too was confronted with this broad array of issues. And we have to see the entrepreneurship education as part of the systemic challenge, I think. If we're going to try to address everything, even focusing on specific areas, which is how you have to break it up, right? But this is an integral part. That's the word I was looking for. This is an integral part of it. And in fact, coming out of that realization, WAY has decided, based on this project, using the work on the Gender Smart Entrepreneurship Education and Training Plus strategy developed by Professor Orser, use that as a starting point to actually establish a community of practice around the issue of inclusive entrepreneurship and training. And I'm pleased to be able to announce this here today. Our goal is to bring together academics and practitioners, and because of the work I've done, I see the role of policymakers and the private sector. So we really want to bring together people who are interested in this topic, who are already doing work on this topic, to engage in designing and delivering and sharpening and making it even more impactful, the work on inclusive entrepreneurship education. Our goal is to increase the inclusivity of the concept and delivery of EET to benefit learning and practice in order to increase the benefits of entrepreneurial activity for economic growth and sustainability. Comes back to my mantra about improving it for everybody, not just for one group at the end of the day. And so I'm really excited. I would encourage the participants to take a look. There's a link to our website there and a link to the community of practice, because I too have been looking at the comments and I think that there's a lot of interesting work. Let me now pivot back to the core, this GEET Plus project, which is what particularly for WAY has been the starting point on this endeavor and in this journey. And I'd like to ask Professor Orser if she can give us a short overview of the key elements and what it is intended to achieve in this particular context.
Okay, well, thank you, Margot. And a little bit more perspective, one of the reasons I'm engaged as a board member at WAY is the opportunity to collaborate with not just academics, and I'm very active in the academic community. I know a number of my colleagues are on the call today. I send you warm wishes, but also senior policymakers and policy influencers. And so the collaboration that Margot has just talked about is trying to bring together multiple perspectives and thought leadership to inform entrepreneurship education and training from a gender lens. What is the GEET? We've talked a little bit about that today. This is a co-authored initiative with Catherine Elliott. Catherine comes from an adult learning program evaluation background at Telfer, and I come from an entrepreneurship education and researcher perspective. And together in August 2020, we launched a technical report called the GEET. The why is obvious. The what is to translate evidence-based insights into some practical applications. And Helen talked about tell the story. And Dan talked about, circling around it. What we hope this report, framework, scorecard does is to aggregate many of the influences specific to entrepreneurship education and training from an adult learning perspective to address the stereotypes and biases inherent in content design, delivery, evaluation. And who is this initiative targeted at? Immediately, obviously, instructors and trainers, but also, as you can see through this call, policymakers, advocates, and funders as they design criteria to fund programs in entrepreneurship. Nicole, next slide. So these are the principles we have advanced, and I'm not going to read the principles other than the first one to say that the foundational principle of the work is equity, diversity, and inclusion. And that includes at every level of program design, delivery, evaluation, in recruitment, retention, impact, so that investment in entrepreneurship education and training is indeed inclusive. Now, how do we do that? Next slide. So in trying to wrap our hands around entrepreneurship education and training, we have advanced a 7-component model. And, for many of us on the calls, this material is bread and butter. It's what we do as educators. It's important to understand the gendered nature of access to resources, the gendered nature of how programs are designed, developed, delivered, evaluated, again with that focus on equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so the report and toolkit, next slide, Nicole, presents to you a scorecard. And the scorecard is comprised of both a description of the antecedents or the subcomponents of each of those key components of the GEET framework. And you'll see on the right-hand side some illustrative metrics. Why? Because when Catherine and I have reached out, be it in Canada or around the world, to talk to small business and innovation support organizations, one of our key takeaways is when we ask, how are you doing? How inclusive is your program? Very often the comments are aspirational. Because when we ask where the evidence is, there's very little. But the other thing we heard from a lot of educators and trainers is that they are seeking input and direction on how to make those programs more inclusive and not just bring women to the door, but embrace gender identities and content that can strengthen curricula. So here you go. This is an example of one panel within the scorecard. You've got your component, your illustrative metrics. It allows you to score areas of strength and areas of development. So in reading through individually or on teams, you can identify and prioritize areas of further development. You can also customize the tool. Last week, I had the privilege of participating or observing in the Women Organization Social Enterprise group in Ontario. And they actually used the scorecard to design a 3-day workshop. Great. It was very helpful to see them frame how they could work with their trainers and educators to review program design, customizing to their learning need. But we're also trying to understand how this tool should be adapted to different cultural, geospecific contexts, and that's what the action strategy is about. Last slide. So here you go. Here's one more example of a couple of the panels, and I'll just point to the right third row as an example to illustrate all of these criteria are evidence-based. Okay, so this one says program includes deliberate approach to expanding women's networks, enhanced capital, enhanced diversity, etc. And some of the work that Catherine Elliott has done speaks to entrepreneurial identity. She's just published a paper that included about 600 respondents from the University of Ottawa and Carleton University. And she queried them on who is an entrepreneur? And when you imagine an entrepreneur, who is that person? And not surprisingly, the obvious presentation of entrepreneur, Zuckerberg, the late Steve Jobs, we heard identical responses in our work in the Middle East. When students think of entrepreneurs, it's typically high-tech, male, US-centric individuals. Interestingly, 10% of the women, 1% of the men could identify with a female entrepreneur. But also interestingly, when we asked them to name an entrepreneur, of the 600 students, only one identified a woman entrepreneur, and that was Beyonce. So really, you know, even the image of entrepreneurship is in need of development in country-specific contexts so that it's culturally appropriate. So that's a really quick walkthrough. The report is available both on the WAY site, and Margot can perhaps send that link, and I'll send the link to the Telfer Women Entrepreneurship Research Exchange, where you'll find this as well. And we invite you to read the report, and it's available to adapt and inform your programming. And we'll talk a little bit about good practice in a minute. So I think I want to move the conversation on so that we can leave with some illustrative good practices of how inclusive entrepreneurship education is being enacted in various cultural contexts. Margot, back to you.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Yes, and indeed, we are going to share the links. And again, I would encourage our participants to recognize that this is, for us, the start of a conversation. And we look forward to continuing the discussion and collaborating in the context of the community of practice, which you can access through the WAY website. So we're going to share that with you in the chat and in the follow-up as well. At this stage now, I would like to really, as Barbara mentioned, begin to open up the conversation with our participants, but really to focus on good practices that you would like to share, or that you think should be considered. Another point that I would also make is the work that we're doing at this stage is focused on formal education, formal systems. We fully recognize that there are indigenous and there are local and informal systems through which knowledge is being shared. And at some point in the future, we're hoping the second round, perhaps we can begin to look at that more systematically. But for today's discussion and for the current work under the GEET, we are really looking at the formal. In order to open up the discussion, I would like to start with our panel. Each panel member, if you would like to share your recommendation for a good practice that could help to address some of these things. And Helen, can we start with you? And so I think that would build the momentum, and or participants, please, if we can limit your responses to 1 minute so we can hear from everybody, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. Helen?
Thank you, Barbara. Just to mention, I also just wanted to bring to our attention that even as we talk about women entrepreneurs, they are not actually homogeneous. So let's start from there. That's something that should be at the back of our mind as we talk about this woman entrepreneur. I'd put there one of the good practices that we have seen in our Kenya government is that when the initiative for Women Enterprise Fund, this fund has been helpful in the sense that most of the time the women who have been excluded from the financial sector because they do not have any collateral, and sometimes their businesses may not generate any profit that can enable them to take up loans. So this is one of the affirmative actions that the government launched in 2013, and it is good because it has brought women together through women groups, and it is non-interest bearing. And in that sense, it is helping women to break through the financial barriers, which is one of the key barriers that has been identified. Again, if that can be together with other organizations in partnership with the government, that could be something.
Thank you so much. Geraldina, anything that you would like to add in terms of a good practice?
Yes, Margot, yes, I would like to just mention 3 things, and this is as a result of the reflection on the GEET Plus action strategy. One is the measurement of results and impact with a gender perspective, and this makes a difference, no? Because it gives us awareness of how much are we really being inclusive. Then we have built a community which is called Zona Zero, and this community is about how can we encourage more women to join into our co-curricular activity. And also thanks to the pandemic, this Zona Zero has spread nationwide, so it's throughout the country, so that's something very good. And finally, we have been giving our first steps into the design of co-curricular programs under the GEET Plus guidelines and principles. So that has been very interesting, and we would like to conduct further studies once the program is being implemented, to see how it differentiates from programs that are designed without this gender perspective.
Thank you very much, Geraldina. Thank you. Carolina, quickly, if you don't mind, and then I want to open it up. My co-moderator, Dan, will take over, I think. If not, we'll just keep going. Please, Carolina.
Sure. So as part of our work on small and growing businesses, entrepreneurship and impact investing, we partner with the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs. And we developed the Gender Lens Impact Measurement Fund, which is a catalytic fund to support collaboration between researchers, small and growing businesses, impact investors, and business service providers such as accelerators. And one of the consortia that won the Gender Lens Impact Measurement Fund award involved a partnership between researchers from the INCAE Business School in Costa Rica and Impact Hub. And Impact Hub is a global network of acceleration programs that is present in more than 100 cities. So it's really far-reaching, right? And as we discussed, while accelerators we know play an important role in business development from early stage to high growth ventures, the gender gap in acceleration is very significant, as Erin and Barbara alluded to. So through this grant, we supported a project to look at how can accelerators apply a gender lens to acceleration program and measurement activities and become drivers of gender equality. And as a result, the project developed a guide to gender lens acceleration, which covers all stages of the acceleration process. It describes how gender difference can manifest at the different stages and explore solutions, best practices and strategies to overcome them. And this kind of led to changes in the Impact Hub accelerators, but also is informing global practice at the acceleration level. And I'm very happy to share the link to the guide in the chat if that's.
Yes, please, Carolina. And Barbara, and I'm very anxious to get to but please, Barbara.
Okay. Two examples. Thanks, Margot. One is the Financial Feminist Investment Lab at the University of Calgary. I'm choosing this because it's a collaboration with the C51, an online women-focused venture capital fund. Collaboration between academe and investors with deep knowledge of gendered experiences. And I know that Kenwell Bakari is on the call, who's helping to lead that. So please throw your contact information in. It's one element of the ecosystem, knowing that less than 3% of SMEs in Canada owned by women are able to attract VC capital. Second good practice, and here I'll throw that in, is INJAZ in Jordan, a program called Launching LEAP. I'll send the acronym and contact in. That's an organizational play for education at middle school to university. Under the leadership of Dima Bibi, she has done a gender assessment in the content, in the textbook, in the train the trainers, focusing on entrepreneurship education with rapid deployment of new curricula. An initiative that's transcended not only entrepreneurship, but now full curricular review in the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. So you've got one women-focused program, but you can see these kind of interventions can have national impact on education and training. Margot?
Thank you very much, Barbara. And as you ended on Jordan, I also want to mention Nigeria, because it was a learning for me to know that Nigeria requires entrepreneurship education at every level of instruction, and they've been doing it for the last 10 years. The nice thing about this study is that we get an opportunity to look at Nigeria in this context and to draw some of the lessons or to share some of our learning. I'd like now to open it up to our participants and thank you for holding your fire. We're short of time, but I know you're in the very capable hands of my co-moderator.
Thanks so
Please,
much.
put up your hand signal so we can see who wants to speak, please.
Yeah, and I've already been pointing to several people in a queue for speaking up. We're going to start with Julia. Love to hear more about the work you're doing across borders and with Qatar in particular, and how you see this fitting in. What kind of lesson can we learn about that? Julia?
Yeah, hello everyone. Yeah, we've been working with Qatar University now and other institutes in that region to build entrepreneurs across borders programs. In Qatar, we specifically run a female-only program, and actually we're extending that out to Europe as well as other institutions. And I know some of the comments that have come in the chat talking about not to essentialize entrepreneurship as you know, being women's issues. But I think the reason we've adopted this approach is that men don't face a lot of the barriers that women do. And we can design programs to mitigate and train women. Somebody put in the chat some research that talked about how venture capitalists don't ask women the same sort of questions. It's these sort of challenges and barriers that we need to overcome. So we are developing an online platform where we're going to bring in a whole range of mentors for women specifically, both on general entrepreneurship programs in areas of fintech, agritech, medtech, but also in terms of big into social entrepreneurship programs as well, where we're going to work collaboratively with as many partner institutions as we can. The program is free for women. It's one where we build modules in to take them through the various stages of value creation, right through value proposition, right to bringing a product to market. So I was interested in joining today just to gain a wider feel for what's happening within this sort of field pedagogically, but also from a research point of view as well.
Thanks so much, Julia. I'm going to move quickly and actually point to a question that just came into the chat just a couple of minutes ago, and I'm actually trying to find it as we speak. This is Jeff. Jeff, you had a question for the panelists if they could talk about the importance of mentors. I know several have referenced that as well, but can I point to you to mute yourself and show your face if you can, Jeff?
Sorry, I can't show my face. You probably don't want to see it because it's early in the morning still for me, relatively speaking, here in Alberta. No, I think the importance of the mentorship. So some of the work that I do on accelerators has really identified that consistently mentorship and for founders and entrepreneurs, they look at the list of mentors and for a lot of the top accelerators, for high growth accelerators in particular, it really is an old boys network, right? And they operate like that as well. And, you know, they come strolling in and they talk about how they, you know, the success of their programs and their companies and all that type of stuff. And I think just the culture of some of those accelerators really puts female founders off. And the other thing, of course, with some of those is that there's very few female founders that are involved as mentors in those programs. So I'm just wondering about because of the importance of mentorship and role models, how they might be better integrated into formal programs. So that was an open question for the panel.
So maybe if I could just start with Barbara, maybe you could just touch on that quickly and then point to one of your fellow panelists for a quick response.
Okay, that's great. Thanks from Jeff Gregson. And Jeff, maybe you can throw some of your work in the chat because I think the group would enjoy reading some of the leadership you've had in terms of research around incubators and accelerators. And Jeff is also a member of our team. Mentorship, paramount. We're seeing that in the SheBoot program in Ottawa. We see this as an endemic issue about getting seasoned mentors on board. Tough work. Some of the solutions include tag teams, so one mentor for a group. Direct ask is often the case. Perhaps bringing in a mentor that may not be as seasoned and coupling that individual with a more experienced entrepreneur. But I think the biggest point that Jeff raises is ensuring that it's a comfortable environment for both entrepreneurs and mentors to walk into. And that includes, inclusion across the intersectional diversity of who is that entrepreneur. And I think, Helen, some of the work that you're doing through both your school and the programming would relate to this as well.
Yes, Barbara. I just wanted to mention that even I'm reflecting back on research which we are doing on the sustainable entrepreneurship at the bottom of the pyramid, and that was looking at really the very, very informal sector. And there we found that even at that point, the role of the mentors was really, really key, because these were people who are able to hold on to the hands of these young entrepreneurs who are coming up. And we had a case of where somebody a woman who was hospitalized for 1 month, and her mentor picked up and was selling for him, selling for her and selling for his own business as well. And so it works. The only thing I wanted to say also is that when we think about the role of mentors and role models for women entrepreneurs, we also have to think about the level, because there is a level at which and now this I'm saying from a cultural context, when the woman sees a role model who is very high up, sometimes instead of it motivating, it makes them again give up, and that, because it is far beyond me. So even as we do that, we have to think about at what level, who do we pair with who, so that it does not, it has some gain.
Great, thank you so much. I want to call quickly though on Shauna. Shauna wants to pose a question related to finance. Maybe, I think she wants to ask Julia a question, which Julia can respond to, but also perhaps Carolina, you could chime in. Shauna?
Thank you so much, and thank you to the panelists today. I think the key importance for me is on financial literacy. Numerous studies have proven that women often self-report as less confident when it comes to financial literacy and confidence. So Julia, I'm wondering how you're incorporating that into your program.
Interesting. Okay, so we work with NatWest, who are a major British bank, major international bank, and they have an entrepreneurship program, which we follow because it's the most authentic program we can take our students through. And we take them through their modules from value proposition to entrepreneurial mindset, sorry, my teeth in. And we actually take them through a number of finance modules as well, in terms of revenues, incomes, etc. So by the time that they write their business plan or their business canvas, they fully understand all the facets of finance, whether it be income, profit, loss, etc. So yeah, so we follow a very well-established program. Because actually when they leave us, then they're already equipped to go to a bank, to go to an incubator, because we've trained them in that way. We followed the bank's processes. So
Right.
Nothing they're going to experience is going to be a shock or a surprise to them.
And can I ask one follow-up question to that?
Yeah,
I'm
of course.
wondering if you're talking to them about preventing versus promoting questions. I know there's been some studies done out of Canada that women are often given preventing questions when presenting business cases as opposed to male counterparts.
Yeah, I mean, because in terms of, this is something that we will develop more so on the Entrepreneurship Across Borders program, the female specific program. At the moment, the program that we run in the UK is both gender, it's males and female students that we incorporate onto this program. So we don't tend to base our teaching around that. We tend to teach it very neutrally and very naturally. And that isn't so much of a problem. We actually bring in the bank to take them through how to pitch their business, how to answer, what sort of questions to answer, etc., etc. So we prepare them in that way. But I think that's something that we need to incorporate, and that's why I was interested in the GEET, in this program, because that will help and alert us to some of the barriers that women face that perhaps we don't always think about.
Absolutely. Would love to connect with you further on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Be delighted to. I'll put my details in the box.
Thank you.
You're on mute, Dan.
I've thrown in some tools and a link, because the work we're doing in Canada is also included not only research on small business financial literacy, there's very little work done, lots on consumer literacy, but also a portfolio of tools and learning aids that are free of charge to download, and readiness diagnostics that you can test client literacy, or acumen, whatever word you're employing to talk about financial knowledge.
Great, apologies, I was on mute. I didn't want to hear everyone to hear me typing a little while ago, trying to communicate with potential contributors here. But it looks like we've run a little short on time. There's quite a bit left in terms of contributions. We encourage everyone to take the last minute to add your notes, your questions. Apologies to several people who had a question lined up. And a couple of people I wanted to call on, who had to leave a little bit early. But I think we need to move into some type of closure point, Margot. I'm going to turn it back over to you to help us close this and really articulate, at least in general ways, what the next steps are.
Yes. You know, I think I wouldn't be fair to try to summarize today's discussion, but I tell you what my takeaway is, because it speaks to my passion. So I'm sidestepping, but I think I want to thank everybody for their contribution, because I sense that there is a commitment and an energy around this topic that and there's an opportunity to share among us what everyone is doing, but also to look at ways in which we can leverage each other's efforts in order to really shift the needle in this area. And so I would like to offer an action point. And for me, let's continue this discussion in the community of practice. I like the action focus, because we have so many instances where people get around and we do what we do well, we talk and then we walk away. So my question to everybody is, how can I would love to get your feedback on how we take this forward today. And this is why we've set up that community of practice, to capture that feedback. The other point I would like to say is that we are recording this, and we're going to distribute the recording along with some resources. Please feel free to reach out. As I said, we set up the community of practice to facilitate that, but if you would like to reach out individually, please feel free. Our contacts will be placed on the website so that you can reach out there as well, and of course in the chat. And I would like to thank each and every one of you, because for me this was really not just eye-opening, but like I said, it just affirmed the fact that there's a lot of work. We recognize the work needs to be done, and we are doing something among us, each in this group here. We're people who are looking at it, who are actually engaged, and we have insights that we can share to help us to collectively generate some impact, particularly at this important juncture. So I'd like to close by thanking our collaborators, Global Business Schools Network, for hosting this discussion. Thank you again to Professor Orser and her colleagues, and to Telfer School of Management for seeding this discussion in the first place with the work that they've brought in, and Way's honored to play a role in carrying it forward. And of course to IDRC for providing us with seed funding to start this GEET Plus pilot project. And it's a starting point. We're looking to expand it. And this is where, again, within the community of practice, I think we can leverage off of each other. We can put our heads together, and we can do something that makes a difference. So I'm humbled. Thank you all. And I look forward to being in touch with you. Dan, any closing remarks from you, please?
Thank you to all the panelists and to all the participants. This is an important conversation, and it's only the beginning of what I think will be an important set of contributions. We have a lot of work to do.
We do indeed, and we're up for it. We're good for this. We can do it.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you, panel members.
Thanks, everyone.